co-writers, and it is their research when they made their master thesis that we have turned into a shared paper. And I'm looking very much forward for Birgitte's presentation, because we chose that, of course, it should be Birgitte, because Sophie sits with a small child here, and they had to step out of the process right in the middle of it. So therefore, it is Birgitte, and I will step in the background and just enjoy watch. So please go ahead, Birgitte.
Thank you, and welcome everybody. Like you see here, I try to visualize what it's about. It's about there's a mismatch between an imagined practice and the actual practice we saw during observations. And the imagined practice is what a teacher in public school told us during interview, and the actual practice was doing observations in class and in a video tape of her practice. And what we saw is, one thing is there's a mismatch, but there is actually a result was that there was exclusion of some children because she didn't notice some of the challenges some children had. So therefore it says right here, it has consequences for inclusion. And now Karen has introduced all of us. Here we are, and actually 4 of us kind of. And we are all connected here in Copenhagen at ICT, Design for Learning. And one of the big perspectives in my talk is going to be inclusion, which is it's a political project at the moment in Denmark and in Europe, where we try to integrate children in difficulties into normal classes, not separating them into special classes, but actually integrating them. And this, of course, it's a big debate. And the positive side is that you don't stigmatize the children in public schools having difficulties. And they're getting into like a normal everyday practice in public school, and they actually benefit from it. On the other side, a lot of teachers in the public debate like pulling their hairs out because they don't know what to do, how to approach children with big difficulties. Oh, it's going to be lighting here. So, and from like Danish government side, ICT is actually proposed as a solution to strengthen inclusion of children with difficulties. So, what we thought was really interesting is to investigate in practice who's going to do this. It's the teacher. The teacher becomes really interesting and central in this. And that's why we conducted a case study of a teacher in public school. Just to give you an introduction to our theoretical perspectives in this, there are 2 opposing discourses. The most known is this one. When you talk about children having difficulties, you see them as inside the child. The behavior is originating from the child. It's imminent. And that's why you actually, when you do any interventions, you do it towards the individual child. And it originates from this cognitive science. On the other hand, you try to see it as constructed, it's situated. So instead of saying having difficulties, they are being in difficulties. You have children in difficulties. So you look at the context instead. So when you do interventions, you actually do it in the context. The whole class is put into play, so to speak. And like I said, the most known, when you talk about inclusion, is that there's a child, you put it, you integrate it, you try to make this child fit into context instead of changing the whole context. So what we are trying to argue for, and others do, is that instead of looking at these discourses as opposing, to kind of, at least as to complement each other, because actually there are children having difficulties inside, kind of. You can't, it's not only the context, but They could supplement each other, these two perspectives. So in relation to ICT, they are two, you look at it, when you change the user, you talk about compensating ICT, and when you talk about changing the whole context, you talk about substituting ICT. These theoretical perspectives, I'll try to do it quite quickly. So, and the thing is, and a big point is, it's not about the device, it's not whether you use a hearing aid or a laptop or whatever, it's the way you actually use it, your approach to it. So, to investigate the teacher, we used Olikovsky's. She has different kind of categorized different kind of understandings of technologies. The two that we use is exogenous force, which is what is mostly used. You look at the ICT as predictable. You look at it with, if I put it here, it has a predictable outcome. And it has this positive autonomous driving towards development. On the other hand, you have, and I'm trying to visualize this, it's a linear process, I do this, I get this result. On the other hand, you have the emergent perspective where it's unpredictable. And it emerges in the different situations. So, and if you can actually relate that to the one I just introduced, you see the ICT is compensating, you can relate that to exogenous and like that. So, and to come to what our case was about. We were in a first grade class, they used laptops. They were all organized in pairs around the laptops. And there were children in class diagnosed, and there were children having other difficulties. The teacher was actually earlier been in KIND's project. She was very well reflected about both her use of ICT and her and inclusion. So, and that's actually a big point here because she was very well reflected. She imagined her own practice being in one way and it was actually another way. So our methodology was like this. The teacher was the central, and we approached our research very explorative. And we had this abductive research design. It's like an iterative process. We had a structured way of approaching our data with a theory, and on the other hand, we looked at our data. What did our data tell us? Were there things surprising us? And there definitely were. So we used that as the main driver of our research. So the case, to come to that, it has this mismatch, incongruity between the imagined practice and the actual practice. And what one thing is that we noticed this, and it was unnoticed by the teacher, and actually in the beginning for us too, it was our video data that revealed it. And we saw there were exclusion as a result of this unawareness. So, she imagined and articulated in the interview that behavior and learning difficulties were contextual and situated. And she was talking about having an awareness of children being in difficulties and not having them only. But in the actual practice, we saw that there were only more or less, or dominantly, she saw students or pupils' behavior as immanent and originating from the child. And like having the learning difficulties, when she used ICT, she did it compensating. And on that behalf, we could see that she had a dominantly exogenous force approach to it. And again, I'm trying to visualize it so you remember it better. And actually what we saw was when she had the children collaborating around the computer, she didn't do any scaffolding around using this device, which is actually designed as a single-person tool. And one could argue that, well, then it's a challenge, and it's the teacher's project is that the children have to learn to work around. That's why she doesn't do any scaffolding around the work. But it wasn't that conscious a choice, and what we saw is there were actually quite some intentional exclusion among the children. They wanted to have access to the computer. And again, what we saw is that because she had this exogenous force, she saw this device as a positive driver of the collaboration. It was kind of blindfolding her to see that there were actually quite some problems around the computer. And what she also did was, when there were kids not active at the computer, she was really interested in getting them hooked up to the computer. She pushed a chair in front of the computer, and if she could, she would take their hands, put them on the keyboard. She wanted this connection. And when there were interactive, what was not participating in the lesson, apparently, she didn't research the situation around the child. She was only doing interventions toward one single child. And what we saw was, beforehand, the children had a quarrel, and there was actually a child taking over the computer, excluding the child, so the apparently not active child had just been excluded. And so it was kind of double up for this excluded child. Once the child was excluded by their learning buddy, on the other hand, there was a teacher kind of scolding this child for not participating. And actually, this child was in difficulties, so the child had difficulties opposing this exclusion from their learning buddy. So, yeah, again, just to see the difference between what she imagined, that she thought of herself as not being focused on this hooked up to the computer, that the computer was central. She thought they could contribute by getting ideas, talking to each other, but in actual practice it was really important that they were active at the keyboard. They had to look at the screen, they had to having their headphones on, and in some way being active at the computer. So this exogenous force gave her a kind of narrow understanding of the situation. She didn't notice the exclusion, and actually the excluding student was praised by the teacher because that kid was active at the computer, and the excluded child was actually scolded for not being active at the computer. So it was kind of doubled up. Just one thing towards that is that the child, often the child that was excluded and scolded for not being participating in class was often defined as the teacher as a child in difficulties. So not having, so that, yeah. There were children actually opposing this exclusion. There were other collaborations where there was a child excluding the learning body, but the learning body kind of had the power to oppose it, get in contact with the teacher and say, hey, I'm never getting access to the computer. And the teacher, okay, and then she scaffolded around their collaboration. But there was only children that were kind of strong enough to actually oppose their position. So, what do I say here? Yeah, she had this view of their collaboration as using the ICT as very well functioning. Even if we asked, well, what kind of problems are there? There must be some problems. And she kind of talked into it's good. And she saw ICT as a fundamental positive mediator. Well, what we saw is she overlooked conflicts. It was very subtle. Actually, we overlooked them, and we saw them in the video data. So, yeah, and actually we look at the affordance of the computer, and these unnoticed conflicts in relation to the use of ICT was actually around ICT. Like I said here, it was actually the physical affordance of the digital device that actually created a lot of the crawls. So, just to underline the need of scaffolding around using this laptop. And in Denmark, it's very used to work in pairs around laptops. So conclusion. The teacher is very central in this, and it's crucial also in this project around inclusion. And actually, because they see ICT as a big mediator of this inclusion project, it's very crucial to investigate this. There's a discrepancy, a mismatch between the imagined and the actual practice. There was very dominant exogenous approach, even though she was a very well-reflected practitioner around ICT. She had this view of the device driving a positive development of learning. And it could do it in itself. She didn't... she had this approach of, if I place this device, it's going to do the same thing in every single pairs, even though there were like 24 different pupils in class. So, and it led to these lack of guidelines. We saw the exclusion going on quite a bit, and very much around the children that didn't have the power to oppose this exclusion. So having this awareness, having this multiple perspective around what's going on in practice is really, really crucial and important, even though I know it's difficult. I'm also originally educated as a teacher. I've been there. And she was really well reflected, and that's why it kind of shocked us or surprised us the more. So if you want, guys want to supplement on anything?
I think you said it all.
You said it all.
Yeah, okay.
Any questions? I don't know if me is doing that.
Some lights on.